Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. So, continuing from last week with the and intensive crash course into English grammar. So, to very quickly recap what we did, we spoke about the fundamental idea of grammar and how this is really a collection of sciences. This is to understand the mathematical structure of language and therefore, again, of reality itself. Grammar is always going to be the first and most foundational science in any hierarchy. It is always going to be the key which opens up the deeper meanings of every science. Now, this is most important in Arabic, as we shall see. We spoke about the metaphysical foundations of grammar, that is, these cosmological ideas which underpin our study, the idea of ontology, the idea that things have meanings, that there is a hierarchy, that there is duality and polarity in existence, that these fundamental concepts shall inform our study of grammar in all its colors. Thus, we spoke about the internal hierarchy of the grammatical sciences, how we begin with letters, then into words, and then sentences. So last time we spoke about words in some depth. We spoke about what a word is. We spoke about the different types of words, that every word consists therefore of a meaning and a structure. That according to the meaning, these structures shall be different. Even as in existence there are meanings of substances, there are meanings of activities, there are meanings of space and of time and of cause and relationship. So all these meanings in existence reflect in various structures in language. And so we have the nominal words, the verbals, and the particles. And so we spoke about the structure of the noun, how it consists of definiteness, of gender, of number, and grammatical states. We spoke about what are the pronouns, and we went through those. We spoke about the grammatical cases and how they are the dimensions of a noun, its internal hierarchy, right? We shall see quite ubiquitously how there is not only a hierarchy, but there are hierarchies within hierarchies. It is like a fractal pattern. As you zoom in, the same picture emerges at the microcosmic scale. And so every noun has its internal hierarchy and diagram, which we call its declension. That given one word, it is not just one form, it contains many, many structures, like a graph, and you have to really envisage it as a type of geometrical diagram and form. That any word which comes into your mind should have an entire diagram and hierarchy associated to it. That is called declension for nouns, and it is called conjugation for verbs. And so we spoke about the declension table of a noun. This is of the utmost importance, which we shall see again and again and again. Finally, we spoke about verbs, how a verb analogously has a person, tense, and mood. We spoke about what these things mean. We have the conjugation table of a verb, and I believe that is where we ended last time. So to recap, for our stage at the moment, what is most important is that we are very familiar with the idea of declension tables and conjugation tables, so that whenever we encounter a word, whether it be a noun or a verb, we can remember and recall its table and identify that, for example, this noun is definite, it is feminine, it is in the plural case, and it is accusative. That is the beginning of language. If we cannot do that, if we cannot identify these fundamental features with their spontaneity and instantaneity, a real alacrity and precision. If we cannot do that, we will always be fumbling around the language. The first step is to undoubtedly and indubitably master these tables, to become fluent therein, to also analogously know that a verb, for example, is past tense. It is he did, right? It is singular, third person, masculine. The mood is not as important at the moment, but I will be drawing attention to it. So what is most important is that at least you know that there is such a thing called mood. And that therefore I can say that, look, this is in the indicative mood, it is the normal mood. Now the verb looks a bit different. And the reason that it looks a tiny bit different to what we would expect is because the modality of the verb has changed. Now, to finish this off, I want to very briefly speak about particles. Now, there are different types of particles. Again, as I kept mentioning, right, the structure has substructures because the meaning has sub-meanings. Now, what are the particles? So we spoke that the noun, the nominal words, really speak about things. This is our ontology, that we have things. Right now, things have various, right, there's the thing of glass, there's the thing of being a cup, there's the thing of being a transparent cup, of water, of holding water and all these things. Yet, they're not all the same. Right, some of these things are essential and some are accidental. That the cup is transparent is not essential, and that is quite intuitive. It happens to be transparent, but the cup is the cup, whether or not it is transparent, whether or not it is made out of glass. So that is the ontology of what things are. Therefore, we have the pronouns, nouns, and adjectives. As for the verbals, what are they doing? Well, not only are there things in existence, but also we see that there are activities, that there are relationships between things, that each thing is not just a thing, but it is a thing in some certain state, or posture, or activity, or process. So we have things and we have processes, or states, relationships. Essentially, any meaning which exists inside of a thing. And this is now a fundamental idea in grammar, that every verb and every verbal entity must stand upon the basis of a noun. So remember this grammatical principle, actually an ontological principle, that any verb, and therefore any verbal meaning, is subordinate to a nominal meaning. The idea of creativity cannot exist but in the creator. The idea of being in this of being red cannot exist but in the red thing. This is a fundamental idea, which, again, I keep mentioning that there is a principle, an ontological, cosmological, ethical, logical principle of Tawheed, that when we say La ilaha illallah, this is a worldview. It is a fundamental vision of reality, a vision of being. And it entails a way to perceive reality and to engage with reality. So all of these things, as minute as it may seem, but I'm telling you it is not minute, it is of the utmost importance, that processes come after things, that thingness comes before a process occurs. This is very important. In grammar, you might see that there are different grammatical theories, and even when it comes to the Arabic language, there are different philosophies about how to teach the Arabic language. For example, there is one philosophy which says that to learn a language, or to learn Arabic, we need to prioritize communication. We need to practice speaking initially. Now, I will be the first person to say that speaking is essential to language learning. The idea that you can learn a language by only studying a book, by somehow reading texts, and not being fluent and conversant in it, that idea is uh, utterly untoward. It makes no sense. However, the idea that we begin by conversation is equally nonsensical. This idea begins because we are prioritizing processes, the process of communication, the activity of communication. But as I kept mentioning, the activity of communication comes after the reality of communion. We must begin with the reality before we go to its appearance. And ultimately, verbs are appearances. Ultimately, they are manifestations. But whatever is being manifest upon some ground, upon some reason. Another reason I say this is because now there is a hierarchy inside of the words. Some words will go back to other words. For example, the word of creativity, the word of creation or to create. That's the world was created. That word, and therefore that idea, must go back to a noun. That noun is a noun of the creator. And every word which exists, be it a particle, a verb, or a noun, ultimately must go back to nouns and nouns to nouns until they get back to the central word, which is at the heart of all language, which is the word of God, the word of the one. Huwa in Arabic. Huwa, that blessed word of God, which is the most fundamental word in existence. Because the idea of God is the most fundamental idea and reality upon which all other realities exist. So this, as I keep mentioning, there is a deep ontology to what I'm mentioning over here. But okay, we've spoken about what nouns are, what verbals are. As for particles, the idea of the particle is to give structure to the sentence. They are purely syntactic. They draw forth meanings. I'll give some examples. For example, a preposition. The preposition in, to be in something. He is in the house. What meaning is this carrying? Well, there is a meaning to being inside, which is a spatial meaning. There is a meaning to being at a certain time, a temporal meaning. Again, connectives can bring forth the idea of time. He did this, and then he did that. But really, what is happening here is that these particles help to decline the noun and perchance to conjugate the verb. Particles exist in tandem with nouns and verbs to bring forth different shades of meanings. So as we have things and as we have processes, there are the relationships and structures of existence. And give me 1 second, it's raining outside. And that should be better. The idea of particles is very fundamental. Particles carry a very important meaning. They carry the meaning of these fundamental structures which underlie existence. Structures of space, of time, of causality, of connection. So again, similar to what I said about pronouns, that pronouns must be the first words which we memorize in learning a language. Similarly, so for the particles. The particles are one of the first things that we must memorize and learn when studying a language. Now, again, there are some different types of particles which I would like you to memorize. The first are called the interrogative particles. Interrogative, archaic word, here it means just to ask, right? Particles that we use to ask questions. That every meaning which exists is an answer to a question. There is always an antecedent question, whether we ask it explicitly or not, which opens up that meaning. These pertain again to the different dimensions of existence. which lay hidden, because initially existence is a pure unity. There's a pure unity of experience. But then as we engage with existence, we can ascertain certain aspects to it. As I keep bringing up, right, we have a single thing, which is this cup, the single thing, but then we can ask, well, what is it? Well, firstly, what is the most fundamental question? Is it? Is there a cup? Yes, there is. That speaks to existence, the fact that it is, it has being. Secondly, what is it? Well, there are actually many things to answer, right? It can be, this is a glass object. It is something which contains water. There's something which has a handle. Of course, these are not really answering what is it. What is this? It is a cup. Because the essence of what it is a cup. Right? That speaks to quiddity. Now, perhaps I have multiple cups, which actually I do over here. Then we can say, well, which cup has the, I don't think you can see this, but which cup has the water? It is this one over here, actually. It does not show well in the video, but right, there's a way to ascertain which one, that there are a plurality of these individuals, but they have difference in individuality between them. I can speak about, well, how was the cup made? Or how does it sparkle? How does it hold water? This speaks to the qualities of the cup. How much water can it store? Quantity. Where is the cup? When did you buy this cup? Why? Why is the cup made in a certain way? Why is it actually made out of glass? Now, these words are really the most fundamental words which underlie language, because they open up the most fundamental meanings and dimensions of being itself. That by asking each of these questions, I can understand the different dimensions of what the cup is. And so a very powerful and natural way to learn language is to see all of language as a sort of hierarchy of questions and answers. At first we ask, what is it, or is it? And that leads to the most basic question, that it is. How do I say that it is? How do I speak about what it is? How do I articulate its different categories of when it is and where it is and how it is? And these are, in fact, the metaphysical categories. I did mention once that Aristotle's program of philosophy begins in his logic. Aristotle's logic begins in his categories. The categories of logic are simply the categories of grammar. Aristotle simply went through the Greek particles, very similar to what we have over here. And these become the categories. I think there's a few more. I mean, I think there's one which is posture and habiliment, but put that away for the time being. These are the categories, the fundamental ways of being. But every word is one of these things, and every sentence is answering one of these things. So these are the interrogative particles. Then we have the prepositions, which I just mentioned before. Now, the best way to think about a preposition is that it declines a noun into its grammatical cases. We move all the way back. Right, I spoke about these cases, that every noun has a dimension and color of its meaning. It's declining into a form. Right, to say that the star is shining or that I saw the star is not the same, well, it can be the same star, but it's not the same meaning of the star. Its place in existence is different. That the star is shining, or that I saw the star, or that a moon appears next to this star, might be the same star, but it's different in its meaning, and that is what the grammatical case is telling us. Now, the best way to think about a preposition is that it is used to decline a noun into a case. This might not be the most natural way to think about it in English. However, it is the best way, especially when it comes to other languages and to linguistic theory in general. So I would encourage you that whenever you see a preposition, think about, well, what is the preposition doing to the noun? And we will go through all these grammatical cases at some stage. It's not too necessary at the moment. The main ones are going to be, well, in Arabic, you have the nominative, the accusative, and the genitive. And that will do us for now. So I put over here, right, certain prepositions can be expressing the idea of a thing is with another thing, right? It is in some connection to it. It is by the other thing. That, I can go to a place, or I can do it unto a reason. So to, right, I buy some bread to feed my family or something like that, right? So all of these prepositions are expressing certain modalities of meaning. Now, we have connectives. These are words which are used to string clauses together, and we shall see that. So just as a noun has a certain meaning, in fact, a clause or a sentence also has a meaning. This noun can be in the locative state, to speaking about its place. It can be in the nominative case, it is the subject. But similarly, a sentence can kind of have a state, if you want to use that word. This sentence is speaking about the reason for something happening. This sentence is speaking about the place where something occurred. It is the connectives which ultimately are going to give that detail and structure to the sentences, and how the sentences kind of form an internal hierarchy of the paragraph. And last thing, negations. We have the negative particles, those words which negate the meaning of a sentence. So now that is all the particles, at least an introduction to them. Next, a very small amount of phrasal syntax. What I mean here is that, okay, we have our words. Well, what next? We can build words into phrases. We begin with, for example, a noun. Around the noun, we can build up its meaning. We have grass, but we're speaking about the grass, right? Definite article. But then we have these two adjectives, which are also modifying this. So you might say, look, these are just adjectives. The adjectives go to the noun. But then after the nouns and the adjectives, we have the definite article, which goes there. So you have something like that. As we can see, it's quite mathematical. It's quite structural, hieratic. Every language is going to do it a bit differently, so it's not too important to understand this. But all we need to understand is that there is an idea of taking a noun and building a noun phrase. Next, we have the idea of a verb phrase. Very similarly, we can begin with a verb and build it up. Really, the only thing we can do here is to add an adverb to it. And lastly, prepositional phrases. We have our preposition upon. Then we have the object of the preposition upon the hill. Again, if you want to, we can think of upon the hill as simply the hill. I think we call this the adhesive case. The whole idea is that in some languages, in particular, I'm thinking of I think the Finnish language has many, many grammatical cases. Maybe something like Sanskrit potentially doesn't need a preposition. If it has a grammatical case, it will not use the preposition, but will simply decline the hill into that case. And so we say, he is standing the hill. In English, you cannot say that because what is the connection of the hill to his standing? But really, the grammatical case can do that directly, if possible. So that is the prepositional phrase. Then we can think about, well, what is the purpose of the prepositional phrase? Usually it is connected to, it could be saying that he is upon the hill, in which case it is going to him. But in this case, it is his standing, which is upon the hill. So it is going to this verb. And so there's a deeper theory about phrases and how phrases interact. What is the syntax of phrases? But again, this is going into more advanced grammar, into more mathematical linguistics, which is not our concern right here for the time being, but shall be later on. Lastly, a very small amount of sentential syntax. So we have phrases, but lastly, how do we put these things together into sentences? Well, the most important idea here is the clause. A clause consists simply of a subject and a predicate. It can be independent or dependent. That is when it stands alone and forms a sentence. Or it can be dependent. That is when the clause is a part of another clause. And for example, one example is the conditional sentence. Actually, there's a conditional sentence right here. Now, would that he read the book, great benefit would he find, greatly aiding him to an apt power of cognition. So I phrase this in quite a wordy and florid manner, but the point is that it doesn't matter. He read the book, right? Subject, him, he, predicate, read the book. In English and most languages, the predicate is always going to be a verb. In fact, some definitions say that a verb is simply a subject and a verb. So the clause is a subject and a verb. Of course, in Arabic, actually the predicate can be a purely nominal entity. It could be another nominal sentence. So that definition would not work for us. But wherever there is a subject, some noun, and there is some predicate going to that noun, we have a clause. It would be a good exercise to try to spot all the clauses over here. And then we can have, as I said, the dependent clause inside the greater clause or the bigger sentence. This is when you have a sentence inside of a sentence. Over here, this is a conditional sentence. That if he would do this, then he would benefit from it greatly. His power of cognition would increase. So we can look for where is the first sentence? Where is the first clause, the dependent one? It's over here. Now, would that he read the book? If that were the case, then great benefit would he find, greatly aiding him to an apt power of cognition. In fact, this is a very good sentence to analyze. What is happening over here? Notice that I'm saying that he read the book, not that he reads the book. This is because, actually it's a good thing, maybe ponder for a few seconds about why that is the case. The answer is that we are saying would that. Now these particles change the modality of the verb into the conditional modality. Right? We're not saying that he reads the book. If he would read the book, if he would read the book, then this would be the case. So the modality of the verb is different. Of course, now it's just going to be, I think an adverb would most likely call this. Would that are particles changing this. So that explains the connection of this to the main clause. As we see, we build up the clause with adverbs and other particles. So this is the heart of it. That's the overall thing. Then we have the same thing over here. Great benefit would he find. In fact, that should be the clause right there. He would find great benefit. And that's a clause in and of itself. And we could put a full stop there. As for the rest, greatly, well, this is clearly an adverb. Any word which ends with the "ly" ending is an adverb. So greatly aiding him. Greatly is actually going to aiding him, right? Aiding, what is this? Think about it for a few seconds. Not a verb, but it is a verbal participle. To aid. It would aid him. So greatly aiding him is a really like a verbal entity. It's a participle phrase. It would aid him to an apt power of cognition. Of course, apt power, adjective, noun. Of cognition, power of cognition. There should be the genitive construction, the possessive particle over there. So, and greatly aiding him to an apt power of cognition. Well, to an apt power of cognition, that is really the to is a preposition. You might remember that as to can be the dative case. It is telling us the meaning of it or the purpose or the end result, really, that it would aid him to a great power of cognition. So that is all going back to aiding. And the idea of aiding is going back to finding. That finding would aid him. So we have this, an apt power of cognition, inside this, greatly aiding him. The whole thing inside of this, finding, and this whole thing being the second clause, the first one being the first clause. This is the dependent clause. This is the independent clause. Well, we wouldn't call it the independent clause, sorry, but a fancy word over here would be protasis and apodosis. That's a very fancy word for the condition and the consequence, the antecedent and the consequence. So that's a very short crash course into grammar. I appreciate that I haven't explained the last bit that well, but I'll explain it a bit more in future videos. The main thing at the moment is to appreciate the different cogs in the machine which are turning. The idea of words, the noun, the verb, and the particle. The idea of phrases, particular how to build up noun phrases, verb phrases, prepositional phrases. In English, you have participle phrases. The idea of the clause, and that clauses can string together into overall sentences. How those occur, we can go over in more depth, but I want you to be familiar with this basic structure and ideally to memorize all the main details over here. So let's leave that there.